Jasmine and Jade Thompson, known within elite military circles as the Shadows, were not just highly skilled soldiers, they were legends in their field. Their expertise in covert operations, tactical combat, and psychological warfare had made them indispensable assets to the military. They had just returned from a classified mission overseas, one that tested not only their skills but also their resilience as individuals. The mission had been grueling weeks spent in the harsh wilderness, infiltrating enemy lines and dismantling a dangerous operation that had been threatening international security. Despite the exhaustion, there was a certain calm that always settled over them when they were together. As sisters, their bond went far beyond blood. It was forged in fire, tested in battle, and tempered by trust. Now, back in their hometown, a small, unassuming community nestled on the edge of a sprawling urban center, the sisters sought solace in the simplicity of life outside the military. This was where they grew up, where their parents had instilled in them the values of discipline, courage, and an unyielding sense of justice. They had returned not just for rest, but with a purpose. Over the years, their community had fallen into decline, with corruption and crime seeping into its very foundation. Once vibrant and full of life, it was now a place where people moved with wary eyes and quick steps, avoiding confrontation and keeping their heads down. Jasmine and Jade saw it as their duty to bring some semblance of hope back to this place. Their first step was to rebuild the local youth training center, a place that had once been a sanctuary for kids seeking refuge from the chaos around them. Years ago, the center had been the heart of the community, a place where young minds and bodies were molded, where they learned discipline, teamwork, and self-respect. It was where Jasmine and Jade themselves had trained in martial arts and developed their love for strategy and physical fitness. But the center had long since fallen into disrepair, abandoned by the authorities and left to decay. Determined to breathe new life into it, the sisters had poured their personal savings into renovations, transforming the crumbling building into a modern facility equipped with training mats, punching bags, and even a small tactical simulation area. The first week of reopening the center had been a whirlwind. Dozens of kids, from curious teenagers to troubled youths, showed up daily, eager to learn from the enigmatic women who ran the place. Jasmine and Jade worked tirelessly, teaching not just physical skills but also the mental discipline required to navigate life's challenges. They quickly became role models, admired for their strength and calm demeanor. The kids gravitated toward them, drawn by their no-nonsense approach and the sense of security they exuded. However, not everyone in the community welcomed their return. Among the local police force, a group of officers had taken notice of the sisters' activities with growing suspicion. Officers Brady and Carter, in particular, had long been symbols of the corruption that plagued the town. Known for their heavy-handed tactics and dubious dealings, they ruled the streets with intimidation and a sense of untouchable authority. Brady, a man in his late 30s with a permanent sneer etched on his face, was notorious for his temper. Carter, his younger partner, was quieter, but no less dangerous, always following Brady's lead without question. The two had built a network of fear, ensuring that no one dared to challenge their actions. For Brady and Carter, the re-emergence of the Thompson sisters was not just an annoyance, it was a threat. They couldn't quite place why, but something about the way Jasmine and Jade carried themselves set them on edge. The women moved with precision, their posture erect, their gazes sharp. They didn't flinch or defer, even when confronted. It was as if they saw through the facade of authority that Brady and Carter projected. This alone was enough to make the officers wary. But it wasn't just their demeanor that drew suspicion, it was the growing influence the sisters were gaining within the community. The youth, once easy to control and manipulate, were now rallying around Jasmine and Jade, finding purpose and strength in their teachings. Brady and Carter saw this as a direct challenge to their power. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon and the streets began to empty, Brady and Carter sat in their patrol car, parked across from the youth center. From their vantage point, they watched as Jasmine and Jade wrapped up another training session. The two sisters moved fluidly, demonstrating a series of defensive maneuvers to a group of wide-eyed teens. The officers' eyes narrowed as they observed the precision and control in the women's movements. It was clear to them that these were not ordinary civilians. Brady clenched his jaw, his fingers tapping impatiently on the steering wheel. "They're up to something," Brady muttered, his voice low but filled with conviction. Carter glanced at him, his brow furrowed. "They're just training kids. What could they possibly be doing?" Brady's sneer deepened. "Nobody moves like that without a reason. They're military. I'd bet my badge on it. Question is, what are they really here for?" Carter shrugged, but there was unease in his posture. He trusted Brady's instincts, even if he didn't always understand them. "What do you want to do?" Brady's eyes remained fixed on the sisters as they spoke to the kids, their gestures calm but commanding. "We watch. For now." The sisters, unaware of the scrutiny, continued their work, but Jasmine's instincts tingled. She couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched. Over the years, her gut had saved her life more times than she could count, and she had learned never to ignore it. She exchanged a glance with Jade, who gave a subtle nod, confirming that she felt it too. Without breaking stride, they began wrapping up the session, their movements casual but purposeful. As the last of the kids left the center, the sisters locked the doors and began their walk home. The air was crisp, and the streets were quiet, save for the occasional hum of a passing car. Despite the calm, the feeling of being watched persisted. Jasmine's eyes flicked to the shadows, scanning for any sign of movement. Jade walked beside her, her posture relaxed but alert. "Something's not right," Jasmine murmured under her breath. Jade nodded. "I know. Stay sharp." What neither of them realized was that Brady and Carter were already planning their next move. The officers weren't content to merely watch from a distance. For men like them, control was everything, and the Thompson sisters were an anomaly they couldn't tolerate. Whatever it took, they would find a way to assert their authority and remind everyone in the community who truly held power. The tension in the air was palpable as Jasmine and Jade began their morning routine at the youth center the next day. The previous night's unease lingered in the back of their minds, but the sisters had learned to compartmentalize their instincts and focus on the task at hand. The center was bustling with energy as the kids arrived, their enthusiasm infectious. Jasmine led a group through agility drills while Jade supervised a sparring session in the corner. Laughter and determination filled the space, and for a while the uneasiness from the night before seemed to dissipate. But outside the center, the scene was far less serene. Officers Brady and Carter sat in their patrol car across the street, their presence no longer a secret. Brady leaned back in his seat, sunglasses masking his calculating eyes as he watched the steady flow of kids entering the center. Carter, on edge, but silent, occasionally glanced at his partner, waiting for instructions. "They've got the whole neighborhood wrapped around their fingers," Brady muttered, his tone dripping with disdain. "You see how the kids look at them? Like they're heroes or something." Carter didn't respond immediately. "Maybe that's a good thing. Keeps the kids out of trouble, right?" Brady shot him a sharp glance. "You're missing the point. They're undermining us. Every single one of those kids is going to grow up thinking they don't need to respect authority. And for what? So they can worship these two? No, that's not how this works." Carter shifted uncomfortably in his seat. He knew better than to challenge Brady when he got like this. It wasn't about the kids or the youth center. It was about control. Brady couldn't stand the idea of someone taking away even an ounce of the authority he believed was his by right. As the morning wore on, Brady's frustration grew. His eyes followed every movement Jasmine and Jade made, their calm and commanding presence gnawing at his ego. Finally, he couldn't take it anymore. "Get out," Brady barked, throwing open his car door. "We're going in." Carter hesitated, glancing at the group of kids inside. "You sure that's a good idea? It's broad daylight, and there are a lot of witnesses." Brady shot him a glare that silenced any further objections. "I don't care who's watching. We're not breaking any laws by walking in and asking a few questions. Now move." The two officers approached the youth center, their heavy boots echoing ominously as they crossed the street. Inside, Jasmine's senses prickled. She had her back to the door but felt the change in the atmosphere before the officers even stepped inside. Her years of training had honed her awareness to an almost preternatural level. Without a word, she glanced at Jade, who immediately picked up on her sister's unease. They didn't need to speak to communicate. A lifetime of working together had given them an unspoken language of their own. The door swung open with a heavy thud, and Brady and Carter stepped inside. The room fell silent as the kids stopped what they were doing, their expressions shifting from excitement to confusion and apprehension. Brady scanned the room, his gaze lingering on Jasmine and Jade. He smirked, already savoring the confrontation he was about to provoke. Well, Brady drawled, his voice loud enough to command attention. "Looks like quite the operation you've got here." Jasmine turned slowly, her expression calm but watchful. "Officers, can we help you with something?" Brady's smirk widened at the composed response. He thrived on intimidation and control, and the sisters' unflappable demeanor only fueled his determination to assert dominance. He stepped closer, hands on his hips, his body language radiating condescension. "Just conducting a little community check-in," Brady said. "Seems like a lot of activity here lately. We've had some concerns about unauthorized gatherings." Jasmine's gaze didn't waver. "This is a registered youth center. Everything we do here is by the book. If you'd like to see our permits, we'd be happy to provide them." Carter stood behind Brady, arms crossed, his eyes darting around the room. The kids had gathered in a loose group near the back, their unease palpable. One of the older boys, Malik, clenched his fists, his jaw tight as he watched the officers. Jade noticed and stepped forward slightly, placing herself between the kids and the intruders. "There's no need for any trouble," Jade said, her voice steady but firm. "We're here to help the community, same as you." Brady let out a humorless laugh. "Help the community, huh? Funny, because it looks to me like you're running some kind of operation here. Teaching kids how to fight, keeping them in line. Almost looks like a gang if you squint hard enough." The tension in the room spiked. Jasmine and Jade remained outwardly calm, but the insinuation hit a nerve. The kids, already wary of law enforcement, bristled at the accusation. Jasmine took a step forward, her voice low but commanding. "We're teaching these kids discipline, respect, and self-defense. You're welcome to stay and observe, but I won't tolerate baseless accusations." Brady's smirk faltered for a split second before he recovered, doubling down on his bravado. "Baseless, huh? Well, I guess that depends on what we find when we take a closer look." Without waiting for permission, he began walking toward the equipment at the edge of the room. Carter hesitated, glancing at Jasmine and Jade, but followed. Jade tensed, her hands balling into fists at her sides, but Jasmine placed a calming hand on her shoulder. "Let them," Jasmine murmured. "They're looking for a reaction." Brady rifled through the training equipment with mock enthusiasm, pulling out a pair of sparring gloves and holding them up, as if they were incriminating evidence. "What's this? Weapons for your little army?" The kids exchanged uneasy glances, unsure of what to do. Malik took a step forward, his frustration boiling over. "It's training gear. You'd know that if you weren't too busy harassing us." Malik Jade said sharply, cutting him off. "Not now." Brady turned, zeroing in on Malik with a predatory grin. "Got a smart mouth on you, kid. You learn that here too." Jasmine stepped between them, her voice icy. "Enough. If you have legitimate concerns, we can address them. Otherwise, I suggest you leave." The room was silent, the weight of the confrontation pressing down on everyone present. For a moment, it seemed like Brady might back down. But then he noticed a locked cabinet near the back of the room. His eyes lit up with the prospect of uncovering something he could use. "What's in there?" he demanded, pointing at the cabinet. "Storage," Jade replied evenly. "Nothing that concerns you." Brady took a step toward it, but Jasmine moved to block his path. Her stance was calm but unyielding, her gaze locked on his. "You're not authorized to go through our property without a warrant." Brady's jaw tightened, his frustration mounting. He wasn't used to being challenged, and certainly not by two women who didn't seem the least bit intimidated by him. The room felt like a coiled spring, ready to snap at any moment. Carter, sensing the situation spiraling out of control, touched Brady's arm. "Maybe we should come back another time." But Brady shook him off, his eyes blazing with stubborn determination. "No, we're finishing this." The stalemate stretched on, the air thick with unspoken tension. Jasmine and Jade stood their ground, their calm defiance a stark contrast to Brady's growing agitation. It was a battle of wills, and everyone in the room knew it. Finally, Brady sneered, stepping back. "This isn't over," he said, his voice dripping with menace. "We'll be watching." With that, he turned and stormed out, Carter trailing reluctantly behind. The door slammed shut, leaving the room in heavy silence. Jasmine exhaled slowly, her shoulders relaxing as she turned to the kids. "Everyone back to training," she said, her voice steady. "We're not letting this stop us." But as the kids resumed their activities, Jasmine and Jade exchanged a glance. They both knew this was just the beginning. Brady wasn't the type to let things go, and whatever came next would be even more dangerous. The tension from the confrontation with Officers Brady and Carter lingered like a storm cloud over the youth center. Jasmine and Jade had dealt with hostility before, but there was something particularly unsettling about these officers. It wasn't just their blatant aggression or their abuse of authority, it was the way Brady's eyes burned with a personal vendetta, as though the sisters' mere existence challenged his fragile sense of control. They knew men like him power-hungry, insecure and dangerous when their authority was questioned. The calm before the storm had passed, the storm itself was coming. 2 days later, the youth center was bustling with activity. Jasmine and Jade worked tirelessly, as they always did, leading the kids through drills and exercises that built both their physical strength and mental discipline. The laughter and focus inside the building created a bubble of positivity, one the sisters knew would soon be tested. They kept their senses sharp, knowing Brady wouldn't let things rest. They didn't know when he would strike, but they were certain he would. The attack came that evening, long after the kids had gone home and the sisters were locking up the center for the night. The sun had set, and the quiet streets were bathed in the dim glow of flickering streetlights. Jasmine had just finished securing the back entrance when Jade, standing near the main door, noticed the faint rumble of engines in the distance. She froze, her sharp instincts kicking in. A moment later, the headlights of 2 police UVs pierced the darkness, their engines roaring as they pulled up aggressively to the curb outside the center. Jade called out, her voice low and steady. Jasmine appeared from the hallway, her expression immediately hardening as she saw the vehicles outside. "It's them," she said, no question in her tone. She quickly moved to join her sister at the door, her body tense but controlled. Together they watched as Officers Brady and Carter emerged from the SUVs, followed by 4 other officers. The men moved with purpose, their uniforms crisp and their expressions grim. Brady led the group, his posture radiating smug confidence. He didn't bother to wait for an invitation, he simply opened the front door and stepped inside, his boots echoing on the polished floor. Well, Brady drawled, his voice dripping with mockery. "Still hard at work, I see." Jasmine and Jade stood their ground, their faces calm but unyielding. They didn't rise to his bait, didn't give him the satisfaction of a reaction. Instead, Jasmine spoke evenly, her tone polite but firm. "Officers, can I help you with something?" Brady's grin widened as he took a step closer, his hands resting on his belt. "Oh, I think you can. You see, we've been getting some reports, anonymous tips, about suspicious activity here. Seems like someone's been running an illegal operation out of this place." Jade's eyes narrowed ever so slightly. "Anonymous tips," she repeated, her voice laced with skepticism. "How convenient." Brady ignored the comment, his gaze sweeping over the interior of the center, as though he owned the place. "So we're here to conduct a search. Just to make sure everything's on the up and up." "You don't have a warrant," Jasmine pointed out, her tone steady. "You can't conduct a search without one." Brady's smirk faltered for a brief moment before he recovered. "See, that's the funny thing about anonymous tips. They give us reasonable cause to investigate. And if we happen to find something suspicious while we're here, well, that's just good police work." Jasmine and Jade exchanged a glance, their silent communication speaking volumes. They both knew what this was: a power play, an intimidation tactic designed to provoke them. But they also knew that Brady wasn't bluffing. He was determined to escalate this, and they would have to tread carefully. Jade stepped forward, her body language calm but assertive. "You won't find anything here because there's nothing to find. But if you're so determined to waste your time, go ahead. Just know that every step you take without a warrant is a violation of our rights." Brady's eyes flashed with irritation at her boldness. He wasn't used to being challenged, especially not by women. "Oh, don't worry," he said with a sneer. "We're not here to violate anyone's rights. We're just doing our job." He turned to his men and gestured toward the center. "Start with the storage areas. Check every corner." The other officers hesitated for a moment, clearly unsure about the legality of Brady's orders. Carter, standing off to the side, looked particularly uneasy. But Brady's authority and his temper were well known, and none of them were willing to risk his wrath. One by one, they began moving through the building, opening cabinets, flipping over training mats, and rummaging through supplies. Jasmine and Jade didn't move, their eyes tracking every movement, their posture steady and unflinching. They knew there was nothing incriminating in the center, but they also knew how far men like Brady were willing to go to fabricate evidence if it suited their agenda. As the search continued, Brady seemed to grow more agitated. He prowled through the center like a predator, his sharp eyes searching for anything that would justify his actions. When his men came up empty-handed, his frustration boiled over. "This is a waste of time," one of the officers muttered under his breath, loud enough for everyone to hear. Brady snapped his head around, glaring at the man. "Shut it. We're not done here." He turned back to the sisters, his smirk returning as he reached for the radio clipped to his shoulder. "Maybe we need a little extra help. Let's bring in the K9 unit. They've got a good nose for sniffing out trouble." Jade's jaw tightened, her patience wearing thin. "This is harassment, and you know it," she said, her voice sharper now. "You're abusing your authority to settle some personal vendetta." Brady stepped closer, invading her personal space. "Vendetta," he repeated, his voice low and mocking. "You think too highly of yourselves. This isn't personal, it's just business." Jasmine placed a hand on Jade's arm, a silent reminder to stay calm. "Your business here is done," she said firmly. "You've searched the premises and found nothing. If you don't leave now, we'll be forced to file a formal complaint." Brady chuckled darkly, shaking his head. "You don't get it, do you? I decide when we're done, and we're not done until I say so." At that moment, one of the younger officers called out from the back of the building. "Hey, Sarge, found something." Brady's head snapped around, a triumphant grin spreading across his face. He strode toward the officer, who was standing near a pile of equipment in the storage room. Jasmine and Jade followed, their expressions hardening as they saw what was happening. The officer held up a small, unmarked box he had pulled from behind a stack of training gear. "This was hidden back here," he said, his tone uncertain. "Could be something." Brady's grin widened as he grabbed the box and opened it, revealing a handful of loose ammunition inside. He turned back to the sisters, holding up the box like a trophy. Well, he said, his voice dripping with false sincerity. "What do we have here? Care to explain why you're stockpiling ammo in a youth center?" Jade's eyes narrowed, her fists clenching at her sides. "That's not ours, and you know it." Brady shrugged, his grin never wavering. "Doesn't matter whose it is. What matters is that it's here, and that's enough to shut this place down." Jasmine stepped forward, her voice cold and measured. "You planted that, didn't you? You're willing to destroy this place, destroy these kids' futures just to satisfy your ego." Brady's grin faltered, but only for a moment. He recovered quickly, leaning in close to Jasmine. "You can say whatever you want, but at the end of the day, it's your word against mine. And we both know who people are going to believe." The room fell into a heavy silence, the weight of Brady's words hanging in the air. Jasmine and Jade exchanged a glance, their silent communication once again conveying everything they needed to say. They knew they were being set up, and they knew they would have to fight back. But for now, they had to play it smart. "You've made your point," Jasmine said finally, her voice steady. "Now leave." Brady hesitated, clearly relishing his perceived victory, but eventually he signaled for his men to move out. As they left, he turned back one last time, his smirk returning. "Don't get too comfortable," he said. "This is just the beginning." The door slammed shut behind them, leaving the sisters alone in the silence of the empty center. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. Then Jade broke the silence, her voice filled with quiet determination. "We're not letting them win." Jasmine nodded, her jaw set. "No, we're not." They knew the fight was far from over. But they also knew that Brady and Carter had underestimated them, and that was a mistake the officers would soon regret. The youth center felt unusually quiet the following day. The once lively, buzzing atmosphere had been replaced by a heavy stillness, as though the building itself had absorbed the tension of the previous night. Jasmine and Jade sat together in the center's modest office, their expressions grim as they reviewed security footage of Brady and his men rummaging through the storage areas. Though they had anticipated Brady's return and his attempts to undermine their work, they hadn't expected him to be so brazen in his abuse of power. Jasmine leaned back in her chair, her arms crossed as the video played on the small laptop screen. "It's clear as day," she said, her voice edged with frustration. "He planted that box. You can see it in the way the officer hesitated when he pulled it out. He wasn't sure what to do until Brady stepped in." Jade, sitting on the edge of the desk, tapped her fingers against her knee, her face a mask of concentration. The problem is, no one's going to care about this footage. Brady's been doing this for years. He knows how to play the system, and his reputation within the department protects him. Jasmine sighed heavily. Then we don't rely on the system. We deal with this ourselves. Jade raised an eyebrow. And what exactly does that mean? Because if you're suggesting what I think you are. Jasmine's gaze was steady. It means we don't sit back and let him ruin this place. We've spent too much time and effort rebuilding it to let someone like Brady tear it apart. We need to push back, but we do it smart. No direct confrontation unless we have no other choice. Jade considered her sister's words, then nodded. Agreed. But we need to be prepared for anything. If he's willing to plant evidence, there's no telling how far he'll go. As the day wore on, the kids began arriving for their afternoon training sessions. Though Jasmine and Jade kept their composure, the unease from the previous night still lingered. The older kids, especially Malik, noticed the tension and approached the sisters after the session ended. "What's going on?" Malik asked, his voice low but firm. "Those cops are gunning for you, aren't they?" Jasmine and Jade exchanged a glance. They had tried to shield the kids from the worst of the situation, but Malik's question made it clear that their efforts hadn't gone unnoticed. "We're handling it," Jasmine said carefully. "You don't need to worry about it." Malik frowned, his frustration evident. "How can you expect us not to worry? This place means everything to us, and they're trying to take it away. We want to help." Jade stepped forward, placing a hand on Malik's shoulder. "The best way you can help is by staying focused and continuing your training. Leave the rest to us." Malik hesitated but eventually nodded. Still, the look in his eyes told Jade that he wasn't entirely convinced. She made a mental note to keep an eye on him in the coming days. That evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, Jasmine and Jade prepared to lock up the center for the night. The faint hum of approaching engines made them pause. This time, they were ready. The sisters exchanged a look, then moved quickly to the windows, peering out into the dimly lit street. Sure enough, 2 police UVs were parked outside, their engines idling. Jasmine's jaw tightened. He's not even trying to hide it anymore. Jade pulled her phone from her pocket. "I'm calling this in. If he thinks he can intimidate us by showing up here every night, he's got another thing coming." But before she could dial, the SUV's doors opened, and a group of officers stepped out. It wasn't just Brady and Carter this time, there were 6 of them, all armed and moving with purpose. Brady was in the lead, his face twisted into a smug grin. "They're escalating," Jade said, slipping her phone back into her pocket. "This isn't just intimidation anymore." Jasmine nodded, her expression hardening. "Then we escalate too." The sisters met the officers at the front door, their postures relaxed but their eyes sharp. Brady didn't bother with pleasantries this time. He pushed past them into the building, his men following close behind. "You're bold. I'll give you that," Brady said, his voice dripping with condescension. "But boldness only gets you so far. We got another tip tonight. This time they said you've been stockpiling weapons in the center. Care to explain?" Jasmine's expression didn't waver. "Another anonymous tip, I'm guessing. Convenient how those keep rolling in." Brady smirked. "What can I say? People are concerned. And it's my job to follow up on those concerns." Jade stepped forward, her voice cold. "Your job is to protect and serve, but all you've done is harass and intimidate. This isn't law enforcement, it's a vendetta." Brady's smirk faltered, but he quickly recovered, gesturing to his men. "Search the place, top to bottom." The officers hesitated, clearly uneasy about the legality of Brady's orders. One of them, a younger man with a nervous expression, spoke up. "Sarge, maybe we should wait for a warrant. If there's nothing here, this could blow back on us." Brady turned on him, his expression darkening. "Are you questioning my orders?" The officer's face reddened, and he quickly shook his head. "No, sir." "Then get moving," Brady snapped. As the officers began their search, Jasmine and Jade remained still, their eyes following every movement. They knew the drill by now. Brady would search until he found or planted something incriminating. But they also knew he was running out of excuses. Sooner or later, his house of cards would collapse. The tension reached a boiling point when one of the officers, clearly frustrated by the lack of findings, shoved a stack of training mats to the floor. The loud thud echoed through the building, drawing everyone's attention. "Careful," Jade said, her voice sharp. "You're damaging our property." The officer shot her a glare but didn't respond. Brady, however, seized the opportunity to escalate the situation further. He stepped closer to Jade, his expression predatory. "You've got a lot of nerve, you know that," he said, his voice low. "Talking to me like you're the one in charge." Jade didn't flinch. "Respect is earned, not demanded. And you've done nothing to earn mine." Brady's face darkened, and for a moment it seemed like he might lash out. But before he could, one of his men called out from the back of the building. "Sarge." "Found something." Brady's smirk returned as he turned and strode toward the voice. Jasmine and Jade followed, their expressions hardening as they braced themselves for whatever came next. The officer was standing near a utility closet, holding up a small black duffel bag. He unzipped it, revealing several knives and other training weapons inside. Brady's grin widened as he turned to the sisters. Well, he said, his tone mocking. "Looks like you've been holding out on us." Jasmine's eyes narrowed. "Those are training tools. They're used in controlled exercises to teach self-defense." Brady raised an eyebrow, clearly unimpressed. "That's one way to spin it. But to me, it looks like you've been arming these kids for something much bigger." Jade stepped forward, her voice cold and unyielding. "That's a lie, and you know it. Those tools are perfectly legal, and you have no grounds to confiscate them." Brady chuckled darkly. "You're right about one thing: I don't have grounds. Yet, but give it time. I'll find what I'm looking for. And when I do, this place will be shut down for good." The air in the room was electric with tension. Jasmine and Jade stood their ground, their calm defiance a stark contrast to Brady's growing agitation. For a moment, the room seemed to hold its breath, waiting for someone to make the next move. Finally, Brady turned and gestured for his men to leave. "We're done here. For now." As the officers filed out, Jasmine and Jade exchanged a glance. They both knew this was far from over. Brady wasn't going to stop until he got what he wanted. But the sisters were ready. They had faced bigger threats than him before, and they weren't about to back down now. This was their home, their community, and they would fight to protect it no matter the cost. The next few days passed in a tense silence, like the moments before a storm unleashes its fury. Jasmine and Jade knew Brady wasn't finished. His obsession with asserting dominance, coupled with his growing frustration at their defiance, made it clear he was planning something bigger. The sisters had spent years in high-pressure situations, and they recognized the patterns and enemy testing boundaries, probing for weaknesses, before striking with full force. They prepared accordingly, doubling their security measures at the youth center and briefing the older kids on how to handle a potential situation. For Jasmine and Jade, preparation was second nature. Still, they couldn't shake the uneasy feeling that Brady's next move would take things to a dangerous new level. It came without warning one evening, just as the last group of kids were packing up to leave the center. The sound of screeching tires shattered the calm as three black SUVs roared into view, their headlights flooding the front of the building. Doors slammed, and a dozen officers emerged, led by Brady. Unlike his previous visits, there was no smug grin on his face this time. His expression was cold and resolute, his jaw set with grim determination. He wasn't here to intimidate. He was here to end this. Jasmine and Jade were in the middle of locking up when they heard the commotion outside. Instantly on high alert, they moved to the windows, peering out at the officers assembling in the parking lot. Brady barked orders, directing his men to surround the building. Carter stood nearby, looking uneasy but following instructions without question. The scene was disturbingly militarized, with officers armed to the teeth and moving with the precision of a tactical unit. Jasmine's stomach churned. This wasn't a routine stop. This was an all-out raid. "They're escalating," Jade muttered, her eyes narrowing as she observed the scene. "Brady's not playing games anymore." Jasmine nodded, her mind racing. "He's pushing for a confrontation. We can't let this spiral out of control." Before they could formulate a plan, the front doors burst open, and Brady strode inside, his men fanning out behind him. The kids who were still inside froze, their eyes wide with fear. Malik stepped forward instinctively, his fists clenched, but Jade shot him a warning look, silently urging him to stand down. Brady scanned the room, his gaze locking onto Jasmine and Jade. "You've had your fun," he said, his voice low and menacing. "But it ends tonight." Jasmine stepped forward, her expression calm but firm. "We've done nothing wrong. This is harassment, and you know it." Brady ignored her, turning to his men. "Search every inch of this place. Leave nothing untouched." The officers moved quickly, overturning furniture, emptying cabinets, and scattering equipment across the floor. The kids watched in stunned silence, some clutching their backpacks tightly as if to shield themselves from the chaos. Jasmine and Jade stood their ground, their hands at their sides, their muscles taut as they resisted the urge to intervene. They knew any sudden movements could escalate the situation even further. Brady seemed to revel in the destruction, his eyes gleaming with satisfaction as his men tore through the center. "You thought you could make a fool out of me," he said, addressing the sisters. "Thought you could undermine my authority. But I run this town, and you're about to learn what happens when you step out of line." Jade couldn't hold back any longer. "You don't run anything, Brady. You're just a coward hiding behind a badge. And when this is over, everyone will see you for what you really are." Brady's face darkened, and for a moment it seemed like he might lash out. But instead, he smiled a slow, sinister smile that sent a chill down the room. "Big words," he said. "Let's see if you're still talking when we're done here." As the officers continued their search, one of them called out from the far side of the room, "Sarge, over here." Brady turned, striding over to where the officer stood near a supply closet. The officer held up a small metal case, his expression unreadable. Brady's smile widened as he took the case and opened it, revealing a collection of tactical knives and training tools. He held it up for everyone to see, his eyes gleaming with triumph. "Well, well," he said, his voice dripping with mock sincerity. "Looks like someone's been stockpiling weapons." Jasmine took a step forward, her voice sharp. "Those are training tools. You know that." Brady shrugged, snapping the case shut. "Training tools, weapons, doesn't matter what you call them. What matters is what the law says. And the law says you can't have this kind of stuff in a place like this." Jade's fists clenched at her sides. "That's a lie, and you know it. You're twisting the law to suit your agenda." Brady ignored her, turning to his men. Bag it all up. This place is officially a crime scene. The kids began to protest, their voices rising in anger and fear, but Jasmine quickly stepped in, raising her hands to calm them. "Stay back," she said firmly. "Let us handle this." Malik, however, refused to stay silent. "This is bullshit," he shouted, his voice cracking with frustration. "You're just doing this because you're scared of them." Brady's eyes snapped to Malik, his expression turning cold. He took a step toward the boy, his hand moving to the baton on his belt. "You've got a smart mouth, kid. Maybe you need a lesson in respect." Jasmine moved quickly, placing herself between Brady and Malik. "Leave him out of this," she said, her voice low and dangerous. "Your problem is with us, not him." Brady's gaze lingered on her for a moment before he stepped back, his smirk returning. "You're right," he said. "My problem is with you, and I'm going to make sure you pay for it." At that moment, one of the officers approached Brady, speaking in a low voice. Whatever he said made Brady's expression harden. He turned back to the sisters, his eyes narrowing. "We're taking you both in for questioning. You can explain all of this downtown." Jade's jaw tightened. "On what grounds?" Brady smiled, but there was no warmth in it. "Obstruction of justice, and I'll think of a few more charges on the way." The officers began to close in, their movements deliberate and menacing. Jasmine and Jade exchanged a glance, their unspoken communication conveying everything they needed to know. They weren't going to let this end here. As the officers moved to grab them, Jasmine and Jade sprang into action. Years of training kicked in as they moved with precision and purpose, disarming two of the officers in seconds. The room erupted into chaos as the sisters defended themselves, using non-lethal tactics to neutralize their attackers. The kids watched in awe and terror as the sisters demonstrated the full extent of their skills, their movements fluid and efficient. Brady, caught off guard by the sudden turn of events, barked orders at his men, but it was too late. Within minutes, the officers were incapacitated, their weapons stripped away and their radios smashed. Jasmine and Jade stood in the center of the room, their breaths heavy but controlled, their eyes locked on Brady. "This ends now," Jasmine said, her voice cold. "You're not taking us anywhere." Brady's face twisted with rage, but before he could respond, the sound of approaching sirens filled the air. More officers were on their way, and this time it wasn't just Brady's team. Jasmine and Jade knew they couldn't stay. They turned to the kids, their voices urgent but calm. "Get out of here," Jade said. "Now." The kids hesitated, torn between fear and loyalty, but Jasmine's sharp command finally got them moving. They filed out of the building, their faces pale but determined. As the last of them disappeared into the night, Jasmine and Jade turned their attention back to Brady. "This isn't over," Brady snarled, his voice trembling with fury. "You're right," Jasmine said, her tone icy. "It's just beginning." With that, the sisters disappeared into the shadows, leaving Brady and his men behind in the wreckage of their failed raid. They knew the fight wasn't over, but they were ready for whatever came next. They had faced worse enemies before, and they would face this one with the same unyielding determination. The battle for the youth center and the soul of their community had only just begun. The night was heavy with tension as Jasmine and Jade moved through the shadowy back streets of the city. Their every step was calculated, their senses sharp, as they navigated toward the rendezvous point. Brady's failed raid had sent shockwaves through the department, and they knew retaliation would come swiftly. The sisters had spent the last several hours preparing for the next phase of their plan, calling on the few allies they had left and leveraging every resource at their disposal. They weren't just defending themselves now, they were preparing to dismantle Brady's corrupt network piece by piece. Across town, The youth center stood in eerie silence, its once lively atmosphere replaced by the ominous presence of police vehicles and floodlights. Brady was furious, pacing back and forth as his remaining men attempted to salvage the situation. Several officers were nursing bruises and scratches, their pride more wounded than their bodies. Brady's face was a mask of rage, his jaw clenched so tightly that the veins in his neck bulged. He had underestimated the Thompson sisters, and it had cost him dearly. Carter, standing off to the side, watched his partner with unease. "Sarge," he ventured hesitantly, "maybe it's time to let this go. They're not just some civilians, they're trained military, probably special forces. If we keep pushing, we might end up on the wrong side of this." Brady whirled on him, his eyes blazing. "The wrong side? We're the law, Carter. They're the ones who crossed the line, and I'm not stopping until I put them in cuffs or a grave." Carter flinched at the venom in Brady's voice but said nothing more. He knew there was no reasoning with him now. Meanwhile, Jasmine and Jade arrived at an abandoned warehouse on the outskirts of the city, a location they had chosen for its strategic advantages. Inside, they found Malik and a few of the older kids waiting for them, their faces a mixture of fear and determination. Jasmine immediately went to work, outlining the plan in sharp, efficient terms. "Brady isn't going to stop until he gets what he wants," she said, her voice calm but commanding. "But we're not going to let him win. This is our home, our community, and we're going to fight for it." Jade stepped forward, her tone softer but no less resolute. "We've uncovered enough to prove what he's been doing, planting evidence, abusing his power, and targeting innocent people. But we need to make sure the truth comes out in a way he can't bury." Malik's eyes widened. "You mean, go public?" Jasmine nodded. "Exactly. We've already sent some of the footage from the center to trusted contacts, but Brady still has his loyalists in the department. We need to force his hand, make him show his true colors." The group spent the next several hours preparing. Jasmine and Jade equipped the kids with basic tools for self-defense and taught them how to stay out of harm's way if things escalated. Their plan was risky, but it was the only way to expose Brady's corruption and protect the community from his unchecked aggression. As dawn approached, the stage was set. Jasmine and Jade led the group back to the youth center, using the cover of darkness to avoid detection. They knew Brady's team would be watching, and they were counting on it. By the time they arrived, the first rays of sunlight were breaking over the horizon, casting long shadows across the empty streets. True to form, Brady was already there, his UVs parked in a tight formation outside the center. He stood near the entrance, barking orders into his radio, his frustration evident. When he saw Jasmine and Jade approaching, flanked by Malik and the others, his expression twisted into a snarl. Well, he sneered, stepping forward. "I was wondering when you'd show your faces again. Here to turn yourselves in." Jasmine stopped a few paces away, her posture relaxed but her eyes cold. "We're here to end this, Brady. You've pushed us, you've harassed us, and you've endangered innocent kids. But now it's over." Brady laughed, a harsh, humorless sound. "Over? The only thing that's over is your little charade. You're finished, Thompson. Both of you." He gestured to his men, who stepped forward with weapons drawn. But Jasmine and Jade didn't flinch. Instead, Jasmine pulled out her phone and held it up for Brady to see. "This is live," she said, her voice steady. "Everything you say, everything you do from this moment on is being broadcast to people who are watching. And believe me, they're very interested in what happens next." Brady's eyes flicked to the phone, his smirk faltering for the first time. "You're bluffing." Jade shook her head. "We never bluff." For a moment there was a tense standoff, the air thick with anticipation. Then, without warning, Brady lunged forward, grabbing the phone from Jasmine's hand and throwing it to the ground. It shattered on impact, but Jasmine's expression didn't change. "Breaking one phone won't stop the signal," she said. "The footage is still going out." Brady's face turned red with fury. "Enough of this. Arrest them," he barked at his men. But as the officers moved to comply, something shifted. Carter, who had been silent until now, stepped forward, placing himself between Brady and the sisters. "No," he said firmly. Brady's head snapped toward him. "What did you say?" Carter's hands were trembling, but his voice didn't waver. "I said no. This has gone too far, Brady. We're supposed to serve and protect, not bully and terrorize. You've crossed the line." For a moment it seemed like Brady might explode. His fists clenched and his face twisted with rage. But then he saw something that made him pause. The other officers, watching the exchange with uncertain expressions. They weren't moving to back him up. They weren't moving at all. Jasmine seized the moment. "It's over, Brady. You've lost. Call off your men, or this only gets worse for you." Brady's eyes darted between Jasmine, Jade, Carter, and his men. He was trapped, and he knew it, but his pride wouldn't let him back down. With a guttural growl, he drew his baton and charged at Jasmine. She sidestepped his attack with practiced ease, disarming him in a single fluid motion. Brady stumbled, his momentum carrying him forward, and Jade stepped in, twisting his arm behind his back and forcing him to his knees. The other officers stood frozen, unsure of what to do. Carter finally broke the silence. "Stand down," he ordered, his voice firm. "This is over." One by one, the officers lowered their weapons. Brady struggled against Jade's grip, but it was no use. His reign of terror had come to an end. In the days that followed, the footage from the youth center went viral, sparking outrage and calls for reform. Brady was arrested and charged with multiple counts of misconduct, abuse of power, and evidence tampering. The youth center remained open, its reputation bolstered by the resilience and bravery of Jasmine and Jade. Though the battle was over, Jasmine and Jade knew the war against corruption was far from won. But for now they had secured a victory for themselves, for the kids, and for the community they had sworn to protect. And that, they decided, was enough. The dust had settled, but the echoes of the battle between the Thompson sisters and Officer Brady still reverberated through the community. The youth center stood unscathed, a symbol of resilience and hope, but the scars of the conflict were visible in the cautious steps of the kids who returned to train. Though the immediate danger had passed, Jasmine and Jade understood that the work was far from over. The fight against corruption was never a single battle. It was a war fought in the small, relentless acts of resistance and perseverance. The community, once silent and afraid, began to find its voice. The footage of Brady's raid, along with the sisters' calm yet firm defiance, had gone viral, sparking a wave of outrage that extended far beyond their small town. News outlets picked up the story, exposing the depth of corruption in the local police force and the unchecked abuse of power that had plagued the area for years. The public pressure was immense, and the department had no choice but to act. Brady was arrested, along with several of his closest allies, and an internal investigation was launched to root out the systemic rot within the force. For Jasmine and Jade, the victory was bittersweet. They had accomplished what they set out to do: protect the youth center, expose Brady, and create a safer environment for the kids. But the cost of their stand was clear. They had placed themselves directly in the line of fire, and while they had emerged victorious, the emotional toll was undeniable. The sisters rarely spoke of the moments during the confrontation when they weren't sure if they would make it out unscathed. Instead, they focused on moving forward, channeling their energy into rebuilding and strengthening the bonds within the community. The youth center became a sanctuary once again. Parents who had previously been wary of sending their children now came in droves, offering support and gratitude. The kids, inspired by the sisters' bravery, trained with renewed determination. Malik, in particular, had grown into a leader among the group, his fierce loyalty and unyielding courage earning the respect of his peers. Jasmine and Jade often caught him staying late, working tirelessly to improve his skills. He reminded them of themselves at his age-driven, passionate, and unwilling to back down from a fight. One afternoon, as the sun cast golden rays through the large windows of the center, Malik approached Jasmine. He hesitated for a moment, his usual confidence tempered by a rare vulnerability. "I want to say thank you," he began, his voice steady but soft. "Not just for what you did for the center, but for what you've done for me. I've learned more here than I ever thought possible, not just about fighting, but about standing up for what's right." Jasmine smiled, placing a reassuring hand on his shoulder. "You've got a lot of potential, Malik. But remember, strength isn't just about what you can do with your hands. It's about knowing when to use it and when not to. The strongest people are the ones who protect, not destroy." Malik nodded, his expression thoughtful. "I get it. I just hope I can live up to what you and Jade have built here." "You already are," Jade said, joining them. "It's not about being perfect. It's about showing up, day after day, and doing the work. That's how change happens." The sisters watched as Malik returned to his training, his focus sharper than ever. He wasn't the only one who had grown. The events of the past weeks had forged a stronger sense of community among the kids and their families. For the first time in years, there was hope, a fragile but resilient spark that promised a better future. As the days turned into weeks, the fallout from Brady's arrest continued to ripple through the town. A new interim police chief was appointed, a no-nonsense woman named Captain Ramirez, who had a reputation for integrity and fairness. She reached out to Jasmine and Jade personally, expressing her support for their work and pledging to restore trust between the department and the community. The meeting with Ramirez was cordial but cautious. Jasmine and Jade had spent too long dealing with corrupt authorities to place their faith in anyone too quickly. Still, Ramirez's straightforward approach and genuine commitment to change left an impression. "I know I have a lot to prove," Ramirez admitted during their meeting. "But I can promise you this: what happened under Brady's watch won't happen again. Not while I'm in charge." "We'll hold you to that," Jasmine said, her tone measured but firm. Ramirez smiled. "I wouldn't expect anything less." Despite the progress, the sisters remained vigilant. They knew how quickly power could corrupt, and they were determined to ensure that the changes they had fought for weren't temporary. They continued to train the kids, using every session as an opportunity to teach not just physical skills but the principles of discipline, respect, and justice. One evening, as the sisters closed up the center, Jade leaned against the doorframe, watching the last of the kids disappear into the twilight. "Do you think we made a difference?" she asked, her voice quiet. Jasmine didn't answer immediately. She looked around the center, taking in the carefully maintained equipment, the laughter that still echoed in her memory, and the renewed sense of purpose that seemed to radiate from the walls. "We made a start," she said finally. "And sometimes that's enough." Jade nodded, her expression softening. "Yeah, I guess it is." As they stepped outside, the cool night air wrapped around them like a comforting blanket. The streets were quieter now, the oppressive weight of Brady's influence lifted. For the first time in what felt like forever, the town seemed to breathe easier. The sisters walked home in companionable silence, their steps steady and unhurried, They had faced impossible odds and emerged stronger for it. But more importantly, they had given the community something it had been missing for far too long: hope. When they reached their modest home, a package was waiting on the porch. Inside was a handwritten note from Captain Ramirez, along with a plaque that read, "For service to the community and unwavering commitment to justice." Jade chuckled as she held up the plaque. "Looks like we're officially heroes now." Jasmine smirked. Not bad for a couple of kids from this town. They placed the plaque on the mantel, its polished surface gleaming in the warm glow of the room. It was a reminder not just of what they had achieved, but of what they still had to fight for. The story of the Thompson sisters and their stand against corruption would become a legend in the town, a tale of courage, resilience, and the power of standing up for what's right. For Jasmine and Jade, it wasn't about fame or recognition. It was about the promise they had made to themselves and their community to protect, to inspire, and to never back down in the face of injustice. And as they prepared for whatever challenges lay ahead, they knew one thing for certain: together, they could face anything.